Welcome to Wally Spark Reviews.
That's Wally with an E!
Hello. So today we're looking at this digital radon detector. It's been probably about 10 years since I've checked for radon in my house, and that's about twice as long as what they recommend here in Minnesota. They recommend testing for radon every 2 to 5 years, and it's well past that point. And being cooped up here in the winter now, inside the house a lot more, and not as much air circulation going through the house, I got inspired to start thinking about testing for radon again. The last test I used was one of those mail-in tests, and they work fine. You just have to wait for the results, and you only get the one test. So this time around, I thought I would go with a digital radon detector. And I've never used one of these before. There's not much to it. It just has a readout there. There's no buttons or anything else to deal with except for that mode button in the back right there. And we'll explain a little bit about that here. There are actually two buttons on the back of this unit. One is the reset button right there, and right from the manual it says reset button used to start a new measurement period. Note, removes all stored data from the previous measurement. So I imagine if you had this thing sitting in your basement for about a month, analyzing the air and coming up with average data over a time period, that would all be erased. So keep that in mind. It's kind of like resetting it back to how you got it when it was new. The other button on here is the mode button, and from the instructions again, it says mode button is to display number of measurement days since the last reset. It will appear on the screen for 20 seconds. So by pressing that mode button, flipping it around, and looking at the screen, it's going to tell you exactly how long this thing has been analyzing your air in the measurement period that you've been using it for. Hope that explains those two buttons. The testing process takes a little time. Even when you first turn this on, they tell you in the instructions here that it will take from, I think, 6 to 24 hours to get your first pretty good reading off of it. The longer it sits and the longer it tests, the better and more accurate reading you're going to get. So this is a long-term device here. It's not something you're just going to turn on and walk through your house and test for radon with. This is made by Airthings. It was about 3 times the price of a mail-in radon test kit, but some of the benefits with this are you can basically look at your test results on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whatever you want to do, and see what's going on and see if there's been any changes. With the mail-in tests, you get the one test, and if it wasn't done right or not the right circumstances, it just may not be the most accurate of readings. Not to say that they're not good tests, but they have to be done very precisely and correctly. Follow the instructions 100% on those. This one here, you can just kind of hang it up and leave it sit, and the longer you let it sit, the more accurate the readings will be. You could also move this from one room to another, for instance, maybe after 3 months. You just want to kind of get a little better reading in a different area, a reading in a different area to, I don't know exactly how radon works. I imagine if you have a big radon problem in your basement, this is going to detect it, or any of the tests are going to detect it, no matter where you put the thing. But for my peace of mind, I might be more inclined to maybe after 3 months move it into a different part of the basement just to be sure. And you don't want to keep moving these things around either. When you place it, you want to leave it sit there for a good length of time to get a good reading in that room before you think about moving it somewhere. They recommend placing this about 2 feet or so, 20 inches from the floor, and about 5 feet from any draft or doorway or window or anything like that, because you don't want air flowing past this. It will offset the test. So what we're going to do is put this down in my basement, and then I'm going to video it for a couple seconds each day for about the next week or so, and we're going to see how this actually progresses and what the test results look like. I believe somewhere on this package here, and you can find this information on the internet, and I'm sure it's in the instructions too, they're going to tell you what levels of radon are good and what levels are bad. And I don't know how to read radon levels, but it looks like they're rated in what? PCI, so whatever that stands for. I'm not a radon expert by any means, but anyways, one other thing I wanted to mention too is this being 3 times the price, it's probably not going to be cost effective. If I even did the test every couple years here in Minnesota, as they recommend, 2 to 5 years, even if I did it every 2 years, this is still about 3 times the cost of a mail-in test. So it's not going to be cost effective, but it is hopefully going to give me a better peace of mind, because I'm going to be able to monitor daily, if I wanted to, what the radon level is in my house. And I like that, as opposed to just, getting a random test once every 2-3 years. And I also like to mention that, at least in my opinion, something like this, even let's say in 3 years from now it appeared to be working just fine, I'd probably want to replace this every couple of years, because it has some vent holes in the back here, and I imagine that's where the testing is done. That's where it's getting its sampling from the air. And in any house, you're going to have so many things floating through that house in the air: dust, cooking, pollen, you name it. And over time, I think it will just, naturally deplete the ability for something like this to give you a really accurate test, as would anything. Smoke detectors need to be replaced periodically, the ones that have carbon monoxide detectors on them and whatnot. They don't last forever. So even if this thing looks like it's working in several years down the line, I probably would still just get a new one every couple of years. It's not going to be cost effective. It's going to cost you about 3 times as much each time you do that. But again, you're going to have that peace of mind of being able to check out your radon levels at any given time that you want to. So that's why I spent the extra money. And we'll see how that works out for me. So the next step is we're going to put this in our basement, my basement, and pull the tab out on the back here. I didn't want to do that right now because I wanted to start testing right from the point that I'm going to have it sitting in my basement, so it can start reading accurate measurements down there immediately. I didn't want to pull it out for demonstration purposes here, because Lord only knows what's floating around in my garage here, and I'm sure it would take extra time then for this thing to start giving me and start calculating more accurate reading for my home. All right, that's what we're going to do. We're going to head to the basement and put this thing in. Then I will be back daily we'll maybe run this out for, let's say, a week or 2. I'll show you updates each day of how it's working and what the measurements are, and we'll take it from there. Right, so I got this placed on my wall in my basement. It says, again, to put it about at least 20 inches from the floor, but I decided to go with about 4 feet, because it also mentions it should be placed in the general area where people breathe air, and I don't breathe air 20 inches from the floor. I breathe air more like 4 to 6 feet from the floor. So I came up with 4 feet. I'm going to go ahead and pull the tab out of the back here, and hopefully it'll pop on, which it did. Let's hang it back up. And I'm going to wait for it to go through some of its checks and do whatever it does. Instead of you sitting here watching this with me, I'm just going to pause it and wait until it's done and come back. it has changed to a little different screen, showing me long-term and short-term averages. Day 1. I don't know how long it's going to take to get something on the screen, but we're going to come back down here daily and just do a little quick video and see what the measurements are and how they have changed. Well, if I would have watched my own video review, I would have known that this unit takes approximately 6 to 24 hours to sample the air and come up with its first reading. It's been about 20 hours and it's showing me a reading now. I don't know exactly what these readings are. We're going to dwell into those more in the end of this video as far as what's good and what's bad. But this is what I'm reading after day 1. We will consider this day 1, and I'm going to do this about 7 more times, give it a full week, and we'll see how this changes and discuss the readings. This is day 2. This is day 3, and thank goodness those numbers are going down, getting lower, because I was getting worried. Day 3. This is day 4. Okay, I think I missed a few days here. I believe we are on day 7, and this is doing something a little different that I didn't see in the instructions. I'll have to double check, but it's now giving me my long-term average, which has been there, 5.40 PCI. But it's flashing on the bottom between 7 days and 1 day, as you can see there. And the 7-day short-term average is 5.40, the same as the long-term. Then it flashes back to 1 day, which I'm assuming is today, last 24 hours, which is 3.72. So I guess we'll see what it does on day 8. I didn't know that was going to start flashing on the bottom there, back and forth. I thought that bottom one just gave you your 1 day average, and the top one gave you your long-term average. So we'll see what happens on day 8. All right, I read the instructions and I have a clearer understanding of how this works now for the short-term average and why it's rotating between 7 days and 1 day. So after 7 days of this thing being it's doing its testing, after 7 days it will start rotating between showing you the 7-day average and the 1 day average. 1 day being obviously the last 24 hours and 7 days being the average for the last 7 days. So I kind of like that. And the long-term average is your average for the total time that you have had this thing running. So if I have this testing for 30 days, then that long-term average is going to give me the 30-day average. If I have it running for 6 months, that long-term average is going to show me the average over the last 6 months. And apparently that'll do that for up to 1 year. I'm assuming 365 days. Then again, apparently it will reset itself after that point. So that's how those two work. And right now mine is reading 5.40 PCI, which is about a 1.4 point over the recommended safe level by the EPA. It's not a cause to get concerned yet because I want to test a little bit longer than just the week that I've done so far. I'm going to let this run for at least about 30 days and then see what that long-term average says. And that should give me a little better, precise understanding and reading of what's actually going on in my house anyways, as far as the radon levels are concerned. So we're going to come back in about 3 weeks and see what the long-term average says, and I'll be watching the daily average and the weekly average and the long-term average up until that point.